Oh boy, here we go again. Yet another woman telling men what masculinity is, all while proving she doesn't have the slightest clue at all.
This is a PSA for men. If your masculinity is so fragile that it relies on women being oppressed, that's not our problem, that's your problem. If you can only be masculine and be chivalrous if women can't vote, if we don't have rights over our own bodies, if we can't open our own bank accounts, own our own houses, that's weird for you.
All right, ladies, here's a little PSA for you. You know what's always funny? When women who clearly don't understand men, as in how we think and how we feel, then suddenly decide to give a TED talk on what masculinity is. And it's always the same tired, worn out rhetoric, and always painted negatively. Just as this lovely young lady is doing when she starts her video with, "If your masculinity relies on women being oppressed, that's not our problem, that's your problem." Really, darling? Because I don't know of a single man alive who's sitting around saying, "Man, I really could use some gender oppression to feel confident about myself today." Yet, that's exactly what she, and let's be real, a lot of other women like her, think men do. It's sad, insane, and downright laughable. But it's also exactly where today's women are at. And when we try to tell them that they're mistaken, they do what women have always done, which is to get offended, angry, and then start telling us we're wrong, that we don't know what we're talking about because we're men. Because to a woman, they truly believe that they know better how men think, feel, and what they want than actual men do. Sorry, sweetheart, as is almost always the case, you're wrong. Dead wrong. And I know you won't listen because you've already made up your mind. But you see, that's not how we men operate. Not even close. Men don't measure masculinity based on women. We measure it by our actions, our words, our deeds, and most of all, our integrity. We measure it by our ability to take life's punches and still stand tall. And we measure it by taking accountability and responsibility for our choices, our words, and our actions. Something you women flat out refuse to do. Something you never have done and never will do. And that's why you can't fathom what masculinity is, because you aren't capable of doing any of the things that, in fact, define it. The fact is, masculinity isn't about oppressing anyone. And ladies, I know your women's studies professors didn't tell you this, but it never has been. Masculinity is about protecting, providing, building, and doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. It's why it's men who respond in emergencies, risking their lives to save those of others. While women, they sit in the background making sandwiches and demanding that more be done. Men do the impossible time and time again, risking life and limb and doing so whether anyone thanks us for it or not. And let's be honest, these days, we're never thanked for it. Instead, we get women like this spending their days making videos attacking men, all while at the same time refusing to acknowledge or appreciate anything that men do. Which, when you think about it, is ironic, really. Because everything she's using to film her little gotcha moment, like the building she's in, the phone she's using to record with, the app she's posting it on, and the internet that connects it all, were all created, engineered, and are maintained by men. Not women, men. And you see, women today refuse to acknowledge any of that. Instead, they declare it to be toxic masculinity, but not so toxic that they're willing to forego any of them. I mean, could you be any more hypocritical, ladies? But it gets even better, because she keeps going by saying, if you can only be masculine and chivalrous when women can't vote, can't buy a house, or can't open a bank account, blah, blah, blah. Well, ma'am, who exactly are you talking about? What century are you filming from? because no real man today is calling for a woman to lose their right to vote or go back to being barefoot and bankingless. And here's the kicker, honey. That whole women couldn't own property, open bank accounts, or even vote line is mostly fiction. In fact, it's a complete misrepresentation and an outright lie. Yeah, you heard that right. I hate to break it to you, darlings, but women have been owning property, running businesses, managing money, and yes, even voting for centuries. It's all there to be found. Here's a tip, ladies, and I know this one's going to surprise you, but there's this really cool new thing. It's called Google. Yeah, I know, it was created and is maintained by men, but that doesn't mean it's not useful. And guess what? If you actually were to use it and go look things up to do some fact checking, and you could then see if what you believe is actually true instead of parroting whatever your woman studies professor told you was the truth, well, it would shock you to find out that what I just said is in fact the truth. But we all know you won't do that, because if you did, you'd quickly find out that you're shadowboxing a villain that doesn't actually exist. And the ultimate irony is that the only people that are saying what she's claiming men are saying are actually women. Women who've never actually listened to men, not even once. Which is why instead they invent a cartoon version of us, then pat themselves on the back for defeating him. And of course they go and make videos to tell all their girlies about it, even though it's pure fantasy, pure fiction. As an evil man once said, tell a lie often enough and it will become the truth. And today's women are proving that to be truth. It's something today's women have mastered. But here's the real truth they really don't want to talk about or hear. It wasn't men who killed chivalry. It was women. It was women who declared that opening a door was sexist. Women who said paying for dinner was patriarchal. Women who mocked and insulted men for offering help, for leading, for being protective, calling it toxic and abusive. Men heard them loud and clear, and as a result, stopped doing all those things and more. Not out of spite, but actually out of respect. Women said they wanted equality, so we men gave it to them. And now that equality means they have to carry their own bags and have to do the heavy lifting, both literally and figuratively themselves, well, now that they have to bear the same burdens men have had to bear since the dawn of time, suddenly it's, where did all the men go? Well, ladies, they didn't go anywhere. You just simply drove them away. You told men they needed to change. So they did. They heard your insults, heard you calling them toxic and abusive simply because they happen to be born with an XY chromosome, and stopped volunteering to be shamed for doing what used to be called respectful. Sorry, ladies, but you don't get to define masculinity, and it didn't vanish because women suddenly had rights. It vanished when every traditional expression of it was demonized. It vanished when women started telling men and boys that simply being born male, being masculine, is toxic. Telling men and boys that leadership is control. Telling men and boys that providing is abusive and patriarchal. All while at the very same time telling them they need to continue doing those very things because, well, it's all men are good for. Sorry, my little darlings, you don't get to be shocked and upset when the men see through that hypocrisy and double standard, the absolute insanity of all of it, and then decided to check out. Sorry, ladies, but you don't get to spend 50 years chanting, we don't need men, then cry that men aren't stepping up. And let's be honest, you aren't empowered. You're guilty of having selective amnesia. So no, our masculinity doesn't rely on your oppression. But clearly, your self-image and self-worth relies on pretending it does. Because if you ever admitted men aren't your enemy, well, then you'd have to have a long look in the mirror and ask the real question, the one you'll never ask lest you have to take any accountability or responsibility. The one that says, if men aren't the problem, is it us that is? Is it maybe the problem is how women have been taught to see men? Maybe, ladies, the problem isn't men. Maybe, just maybe, it's actually you.